I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the thin white blanket twisted in my hands. My body felt hollow, like something vital had been scooped out of me. The silence in the room pressed heavy on my chest. Nurses had stopped coming in, machines had been wheeled away, and the only sound left was my own shallow breathing. I thought for one fragile second that maybe my mom would hold me. Maybe she'd sit beside me and stroke my hair like she used to when I was small and sick with fevers. Maybe she'd look at me like I wasn't broken. But when she leaned in, her lips brushed my ear with words so sharp they cut deeper than the loss itself. At least one useless life took the hint. My hands froze on the blanket. My breath caught, my throat tightened, but no tears came. It was like my body had forgotten how to cry. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments, from where are you watching this video? Dad stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed, his face twisted with disgust. That womb should have closed years ago, he muttered, shaking his head like I'd committed some shameful crime against him personally. I wanted to scream, to rip the IV from my arm and make them see the hole in me, the emptiness that was swallowing me alive. Instead, I just stared at the wall, blank, silent, because if I spoke, if I broke, I knew they'd only laugh. And I was right. Mom chuckled bitterly, pulling her phone from her purse. She snapped a photo of me sitting there, pale, hollow, barely upright. "Don't worry," she said, tapping her screen. "I'll delete it later. Just want proof that even tragedy couldn't make you worth anything." I turned my head slowly toward her. Her lipstick was perfect. Her nails were red. She looked more ready for a cocktail party than a hospital room. Dad stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was giving me advice. "Don't you dare make this about you. Melissa's recital is tomorrow. Don't embarrass us by sulking. People don't like a woman who wallows in failure." Failure. That's what they called the life that slipped out of me before I even had a chance to hold it. Failure. I clenched the blanket so hard the stitches in the fabric began to stretch. My whole body shook, but not from grief anymore. It was something darker, something heavier. When the nurse returned with a chart in her hands, my mom straightened her blouse and put on a smile. "We're ready to take her home," she chirped. "She doesn't need pity." The nurse looked at me with soft eyes, but she didn't fight them. She didn't see the knives behind their smiles. She didn't hear the poison that only came out when the door closed. That night, at home, they made me sit through dinner like nothing had happened. Melissa went on about her recital outfit, twirling in her seat. Mom praised her for looking angelic. Dad beamed with pride, sipping his drink. Then Dad turned his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing. "Don't ruin it tomorrow. Don't let anyone see those swollen eyes. People will think you're pathetic enough already." Melissa smirked, stabbing her fork into her chicken. "Honestly, I don't get why she even tried to be a mother. She can't even keep a plant alive." They laughed, around and around at the table, laughter like knives scraping against my skin. I sat still. I swallowed their words, their poison, their cruelty, letting it carve into me until all that was left was silence. But in that silence, something else grew. Not grief, not weakness. A seed of rage, a seed of something that would not die. And as they laughed at me across the dinner table, I lowered my gaze, hiding the faintest smile tugging at my lips. Because they thought I was finished. They thought they'd buried me with my baby. They had no idea I was already planning how to bury their pride. The morning after dinner, the house buzzed with Melissa's excitement. She stood in the living room in a glittering gown, her hair pulled tight into curls that bounced when she moved. Mom circled her like a stylist at a fashion shoot, adjusting straps, smoothing fabric, beaming with pride. "You look perfect, sweetheart," Mom cooed. "Everyone's going to talk about how radiant you are." Dad clapped his hands once, like a coach satisfied with his star player. "Just don't forget the opening bow. You know first impressions matter." I lingered in the doorway, still in my wrinkled pajamas, watching the scene unfold. No one turned their head toward me. No one asked if I'd slept. No one cared that my body still ached with loss. Melissa caught my eye in the mirror and smirked. "Try not to cry during the recital, okay? You'll scare the little kids. We don't need your Depressing face ruining the pictures. Mom didn't scold her. Instead, she laughed. She's right. Don't sit in the front. I don't want anyone wondering why you look like death at a celebration. Dad adjusted his tie, his eyes flicking to me briefly. If you even think of making this about yourself, I'll make sure you regret it. Their words carved into me with the same cruelty as last night, but this time I didn't flinch. I just nodded once, turned, and walked upstairs without a word. My silence rattled them more than tears ever could. In my room, I opened the drawer where I'd hidden a small box. Inside were scraps I'd kept not because I wanted them, but because I knew someday I'd need them. Screenshots of texts where Mom called me a burden, a recording of Dad telling a neighbor I was a waste of space, Melissa's snide voice on video mocking me for failing at everything. I never thought I'd use them. I used to save them only to remind myself I wasn't imagining it, that their cruelty was real. But now, staring at the evidence in my hands, I realized it was more than proof. It was ammunition. The recital hall was packed that evening. Families filled the rows, children chattered, parents adjusted cameras. Melissa stood backstage glowing in her gown, waving to people she thought adored her. Mom and Dad sat in the front row, their heads held high, proud smiles plastered across their faces. I slid into a back corner seat. The whispers around me weren't about Melissa yet. They were about me. I heard them hissed under breaths. She looks pale. Didn't she just lose the baby? Why is she even here? The whispers dug in, but I stayed still, my hands folded, my face expressionless. When the lights dimmed and Melissa walked onto the stage, the applause thundered. Dad leaned forward, grinning ear to ear. Mom clutched her pearls as if her daughter were royalty. Melissa bowed gracefully, soaking in every ounce of attention. She danced like she owned the world. Every spin, every step, every smile was perfectly rehearsed. The audience adored her. And yet, as I watched her move, something inside me shifted. I saw not grace, not beauty, but arrogance. Cruelty dressed in satin. A girl who had laughed at my broken body, who had called me unfit to live. A girl raised by parents who worshipped her while tearing me apart. When the performance ended, the applause was deafening. Melissa curtsied, her eyes searching for me in the crowd. She wanted me to see her victory. She wanted me to know I didn't matter. But she didn't see the fire building behind my silence. After the recital, families crowded around with flowers and praise. Mom and Dad basked in the compliments as if Melissa's performance were their own accomplishment. "She's always been special," Mom said proudly. "Not like—" Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp, dismissive. "Well, you know," Dad chuckled, patting Melissa's shoulder. "She's proof that good roots grow strong. Some branches just—" "Rot." Melissa laughed, tossing her curls back. "Some branches shouldn't even exist." I felt the words hit me like stones, but I didn't crumble. Instead, I smiled, a small, deliberate smile that made Dad's face harden. He noticed it. He didn't understand it, but it unsettled him. That night, while they celebrated at home with champagne, I slipped into Dad's office. His desk was cluttered with bills, contracts, and papers he thought no one cared about. I knew where to look. I'd watched him hide things before, smirking at me like I was too stupid to notice. In the locked drawer, one I'd quietly memorized the code to, I found what I expected. Papers. Evidence of money transfers, names, dates. Proof of the little shortcuts he thought no one knew about. Fraud disguised as business. Funds shifted under fake names. And Mom? Her signature was all over it. Melissa, too, listed as a beneficiary in accounts she probably didn't even understand. I sat there for a long time staring at the papers, my hands trembling not with fear but with clarity. This was it. This was bigger than humiliation, bigger than whispered insults or stolen pride. This was the lever I could pull to make their whole world collapse. For the first time since the hospital, I felt something close to alive. I tucked the papers back carefully, leaving everything exactly as it was. They would never know I'd been there. Not until it was too late. At dinner the next night, Mom raised her glass to toast Melissa's brilliance. Dad leaned back in his chair, smug. Melissa basked in the glow, smiling like a queen. Then Melissa turned to me. "Still sulking? Don't be jealous. Some of us were just born to shine." I smiled again, calm, controlled, and for a moment Melissa's laughter faltered. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "What are you smiling about?" I met his eyes. "Just thinking," I said softly. "Some crowns are heavier than they look." The table went silent. For once, they didn't know what I meant. For once, my words hung in the air heavier than theirs. And that was when I knew. The breaking point had already passed. They thought they had buried me. They hadn't realized I'd already started digging their graves. The silence at the dinner table that night was short-lived. Dad shook off my words. Mom poured another glass of wine, and Melissa leaned back in her chair, smug as ever. To them, I was still the broken one, the useless one. They couldn't imagine that my smile was the start of their undoing. Over the next few weeks, I played my part well. I cooked dinner when asked. I folded laundry. I nodded when they insulted me, never raising my voice. They grew comfortable again, their cruelty spilling out unchecked because they thought I was too beaten to fight back. What they didn't know was that I had already made copies of everything in Dad's locked drawer: bank records, forged signatures, transactions under fake business names, Melissa's college fund that wasn't really a fund at all, but a cover for money laundering, Mom's initials at the bottom of documents tying her to fraud. I didn't go to the police immediately. No, that would have been too easy, too merciful. I waited. The perfect moment came at Melissa's celebration dinner 2 months later. She had just been offered a scholarship paid for, of course, by Dad's stolen money, and my parents were throwing a party at the house. Neighbors, friends from church, family acquaintances, the very people who had whispered about me, who had smirked when my parents called me useless, they were all there. The living room glittered with lights. Champagne glasses clinked. Melissa preened in the center of it all, her gown sparkling under the chandelier. Mom raised her glass. "To our shining star, Melissa. Proof that good roots grow the best fruit." Dad laughed, patting her shoulder. "Unlike some rotten branches we should have cut off long ago." His eyes flicked toward me, cruel, daring me to react. The room chuckled along, their laughter safe behind their champagne. And that was when I stepped forward, calm, steady, a folder in my hands. "Actually," I said, my voice slicing through the noise, "I have something to add to the toast." The room quieted. My parents turned to me, smirking, ready to pounce. Melissa rolled her eyes. "Don't embarrass yourself again." I opened the folder. Paper by paper, I laid it on the table in front of everyone. Bank transfers, fraudulent contracts, Melissa's name tied to stolen money, Mom's signature on illegal deals, Dad's accounts draining funds that never belonged to him. The room froze. Whispering started, low and sharp. "Is this real?" "Her name's right there. These are government seals." Dad lunged toward the table, his face red. "Where did you get that?" I met his fury with steady calm. "From your drawer, the one you thought I was too stupid to know about." Mom's hand trembled as she reached for the papers. "These mean nothing. Lies." But her voice cracked. Her polished mask slipped. People were already pulling out their phones, snapping pictures, sending messages. Melissa's face drained of color. "This isn't funny. Tell them it's fake." Before my parents could spin another lie, the sound of sirens wailed outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors stepped back, whispering. Church friends exchanged looks of horror. The knock on the door wasn't gentle. It was hard, deliberate, final. When the officer stepped inside, their presence filled the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Langley?" the lead officer said, his voice calm, authoritative. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, money laundering, forgery." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts. Someone dropped their glass, the shatter echoing like thunder. Dad's face twisted with rage. "You did this!" he roared at me as the officers cuffed his wrist behind his back. "You think you've won? You're nothing! Nothing!" Mom tried to claw her way out of the officer's grip, tears streaking her mascara. "Please, this is a mistake. My daughter set us up. She's worthless. She's always been worthless." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we have more than enough evidence." Melissa crumpled onto the couch, her perfect gown wrinkling, her hands shaking. "What about me? I didn't." But the officer read from his notes. "Melissa Langley, you're also under investigation for benefiting from stolen funds." The room watched as the Golden family was dragged out of their own celebration, handcuffed, their neighbors staring, whispering, laughing. And me? I stood still, silent, calm. For once, the laughter wasn't aimed at me. It was at them. As the police cars pulled away, Mom screaming from the back seat, Dad cursing my name, Melissa sobbing, I stepped out onto the porch. Neighbors looked at me differently now, not with pity, not with scorn, but with shock, with respect, with silence. I didn't smile this time. I didn't need to. Because I knew the same womb they said should have closed years ago was the one that had just birthed their downfall. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.